Hello and welcome. Is it kiss and make up for Israel and the US this week in Washington? The recent tensions between the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Barack Obama have been quite public, but supporters of Israel are breathing a sigh of relief at the message of unity coming from the Oval Office. Well, since Israel's deadly raid on the Gaza aid flotilla, the somewhat tense US-Israel relationship has become more complicated. Turkey, America's NATO ally, has stood firm on its demands for an apology and impartial investigation into the raid on the Mavi Marmara. The Turks, upset at the killing of 9 of its citizens aboard that ship, made its anger known, not only to Israel but to the United States as well. Well, the Obama administration is reported to have arranged secret meetings between Turkish and Israeli officials in Europe last week, but those failed to diffuse tensions. On today's show, we look at the complicated relationship that exists between the United States, Israel and Turkey, and ask, how is Turkey's tough stance affecting prospects for peace in the Middle East? Join our conversation with your questions and comments. Send an SMS or an email and we'll take your phone calls on the show as well. Joining me from Boston is Stephen Kinzer, a veteran correspondent who headed the New York Times' first bureau in Turkey. He's written many books, with his most recent one taking the changing political realities in the Muslim world. It's called Reset: Iran, Turkey and America's Future. Here in the studio with me is MJ Rosenberg, a senior foreign policy fellow at the Media Matters Action Network. He previously worked on Capitol Hill for USAID and the pro-Israel lobby AIPAC. And also in the studio is Nur Yilmaz, director of the Washington office of the Turkish think tank SITA. Prior to opening this office, Mr. Yilmaz was a correspondent and commentator for the Turkish daily newspaper Star. I welcome you all to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Kinzer, sir, if I can start with you. From your perspective, has it been basically a kiss and make up session and pretty much nothing else at the White House?
I don't expect anything substantial to come out of this process. I think it's good that President Obama wants to reach out to Israel. It's not good for the United States to look at either of the two countries in the Middle East that are unpopular in the neighborhood, that is Israel and Iran, and try to punish them and use your emotions to push them into corners and making them feel alone and friendless. There's a lot of anti-Israel emotion in the world now. There's a lot of anti-Iran emotion in the world, but it's not a good idea for the future of peace in the Middle East to push these countries away. Somehow we have to try to draw them out of their fear and their isolation, and that's why I think this was probably a positive step. I'd like to see some of the same approach tried with Iran.
Stephen, which country do you think was hurt most politically by the public nature of the fighting that was going on between Israel and the US?
I think Israel is in a situation now where it's wondering what's going to happen with this relationship with the U.S. And I think in the U.S. there's an opinion growing, which I also noticed when I was in Israel doing research for my book, and it's this. The long-term security of Israel cannot be guaranteed forever by military means alone. Therefore, the only long-term guarantee for Israel is a calm neighborhood. Anything that the United States or outside powers can do to calm that neighborhood is actually good for Israel in the long run. And I think some of Turkey's initiatives actually, despite the fact that Turkey is now engaged in this contest with Israel over the Mavi Marmara incident, can actually be very positive. If the United States will listen to Turkey, which is essentially saying to the U.S., look, we're on your side, but we have advice for you. Don't be so confrontational. Ratchet down the confrontation and try the diplomatic approaches. Then I think actually in the long run, we'll be helping to produce a result in the Middle East that will be good for all the stakeholders, including Israel.
Let me welcome back in MJ Rosenberg. Good to have you back with us.
Thank you.
Now, the meeting has been described by some observers as high on atmospherics and low on specifics. And I know in your latest article, using World Cup soccer terms, you've said Netanyahu won, Obama nil. Was it essentially a diplomatic dance that achieved very little progress except for maybe a redemption for Israel?
Well, I think it was worse than a diplomatic dance. I think the way the world will perceive it, particularly the Arab world, the Muslim world in general, the way most people will perceive it is that the United States capitulated to Benjamin Netanyahu. For a while, it looked like the United States was putting pressure on settlements. After all the United States has asked is for a settlements freeze. We didn't get the settlements freeze we asked for. The Obama administration says we got most of a settlements freeze. It didn't apply to Jerusalem, which is where most of the settlement expansion is going on. Palestinians are still being thrown out of their homes, still being evicted. Israel still plans full-scale expansion of settlements everywhere starting in September. And President Obama didn't even use the word settlements once. This entire summit, this entire meeting was about kissing up to Netanyahu in order to appease pro-Israel donors to political campaigns in the United States. It wasn't foreign policy, it was politics.
It's basically because the election's coming up.
Because the election's coming up, right.
Right. Now, so, I mean, beyond the settlements issue, what were the key issues or the key questions that remain following this meeting?
Well, Obama said he wanted negotiations to begin. All Netanyahu said was that, in principle, he agrees. He says, he said, his exact quote was, "We need negotiations to start so they can end," which I thought was kind of a very true statement. Yeah, he wants to start negotiations so he can tell the United States we started them, and then they can end them without success. The main thing is the United States got nothing out of that meeting yesterday. What Netanyahu got, and if you listen to what he said when he was sitting next to the president, was very tough words from Obama on Iran. That's what he came here to get, and he came here to demonstrate to his allies back home and also to his adversaries that the United States can't push Benjamin Netanyahu around, and that's what he got.
Now, Nur Yilmaz, what was Turkey hoping for from this meeting at the White House?
Turkey was hoping to see more pressure from Washington to Netanyahu to move forward with the peace process and with the flotilla crisis that was really that has a potential to hurt Turkey's relations with US and Turkey's relations with Israel. Mm-hmm. But so far we haven't heard anything specifics on that, and to some extent it's a little bit disappointing for Turkey to hear at least not support for international impartial investigation of the flotilla issue.
Well, Turkey's relationship with Israel is certainly strained, but it's not something that's happened overnight. It's been building up for a while. I mean, from the World Economic Forum in January of 2009, when Prime Minister Erdogan walked out on Shimon Peres in anger over the Gaza attacks, through a number of other significant incidents which took place over a couple of years or a year and a half or so, to the anger over the Gaza flotilla attack, which occurred obviously in May of this year, for which Turkey still wants an apology, of course. Let's listen to a comment about Turkey made by the Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman. It says, "Every nation chooses its own diplomacy, and to my sorrow, Turkey has chosen the wrong direction. It's as if we place ourselves in the Ayatollah revolution of Iran in the 1970s. That's Avigdor Lieberman, the Israeli Foreign Minister. How far do you expect this to go? How far do you expect the relationship between Israel and Turkey to deteriorate?
I think what has been going through is related to the general transformation in Turkish politics and Turkish economic structure, meaning that in the last decade, Turkey became the 16th economy of the world and wants more representation in world politics. And it also redefined its interest in the region and prospered through peace and stability in the region. Now it reached to an end where Israel really prevents Turkey to achieve better economic relations and better political relations in the region. Because Turkey's interest is free flow of goods, services, and human. And through blockade of Israel, through blockade of Gaza, and through the Israeli government's policies, I think Turkish government saw its limits on this policy. So now I think Turkey should see some kind of move from Israel's side that would really serve to peace and stability in the region. And this would start with recognizing the importance of lifting Gaza blockade, formal apology, or international probe.
Well, let's Stephen Kinzer, let's get a quote here, a quote from the Turkish side, which has also been fairly blunt. The Turkish President Abdullah Gül said, "They don't have many friends in the region. Now it seems they want to get rid of the relationship with Turkey. My own impression is that they don't have the ability to act rationally." And that's on the 7th of July, the Turkish president talking about Israel. Now, considering that Turkey and Israel do billions of dollars in trade, I think the last figure was something like $2.5 billion, and that was down on previous years. How much real fallout can there be from the current tensions? I mean, how long before this dispute sort of just fades away?
Well, I don't think it's going to fade away. I do think, however, that Turkey might be learning a bad lesson from the United States. One thing the U.S. often does is try to make policy based on our emotions. We think very short term. Turkey might be doing that with Israel. There's a tremendous amount of emotion naturally in Turkey right now supporting the idea of a tougher approach to Israel. On the other hand, there's not going to be any regional peace without Israel. Israel and Iran are the two big military and political powers in that region. You cannot have peace without them. Israel is ultimately going to need some kind of a bridge out of its isolation towards the Muslim world. There's no other country that can do that besides Turkey. Turkey's long-run interest is stability in the region because of its economic interest in trying to become one of the 10 biggest economies in the world. That stability cannot be reached without Israel. So although there's great tension between them, I would say this: I don't think there's an upsurge of anti-Israel or pro-Islamic sentiment in Turkey as much as there is a surge of anger about specifically Gaza. You were quite right when you said that the big clash between the Israeli president and the Turkish prime minister at Davos, it was about Gaza. The Gaza episode, the Gaza occupation, it's being played every day on Turkish TV. There's tremendous focus on Gaza. So I don't think that the Turkey-Israel relationship is in fatal danger, but the Gaza issue needs to be resolved before it can improve.
Okay, let's get William on the line from London. William, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I just observed the previous speaker that the Israeli-Turkey relationship is not in fatal danger. And, well, quite frankly, I cannot understand why not. Because if no sovereign state can expect or accept that sort of treatment of its nationals, where you get brigandage effectively on the high seas by a group of people who claim to be a state, representatives of a state, but in fact St. Augustine said states without justice are only robber bands in
William,
March.
let me put this to MJ Rosenberg, also with an email that we had that had come in from John Lucas Woodenman from our Facebook page, who says, Turkey is a third world outcast trying to impress the world by playing the victim. But Israel is a survivor and can defend against those who hate her. Now, we've got two opinions there. William in London, of course, John Lucas Woodman. Do you see Turkey having much sway over Israel's policy?
I think that Israel needs Turkey. I mean, Prime Minister Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, very much believed in, helped create the Turkish-Israeli relationship, because his feeling was Israel had natural tensions with its immediate neighbors, so it needed a democratic Turkey to be its friend. Israel still needs that. But I think it's very important to remember, and Steve Kinzer just pointed out, the Israelis like to make us think that the Turks and the Palestinians and even President Obama are objecting to Israel as a state. What people are objecting to, what the world objects to, what the world is pretty much united on is Gaza, the suffering in Gaza, and the occupation itself. I don't know any legitimate players on this issue who would not guarantee Israel within its pre-67 borders. Israel always wants to change the subject, but the subject is the occupation, and I consider Gaza still occupied because it does not control its air, its land, or its water borders. So basically, the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem are occupied. When that occupation moves toward a resolution, Israel will have the acceptance that it claims it wants.
Okay, before we take a break, let's quickly hear from George in DC. George, tell us your question. We'll get back to it after the break. George, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Well, I just wanted to ask, all the American administrations are always stressed on the importance of strategic relationship between America and Israel. Everyone knows what Israel is getting from that strategic relationship, but I'm just wondering what's the American interest? What's in it for the Americans?
Interesting point, George. We're going to get to that after we take this short break. In a moment, we'll also take a look at the role Congress plays in all of this and find out how much some of the key members really know. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're looking at the complicated relationship that exists between the United States, its NATO ally Turkey, and Israel. Tensions since the Israeli commando attack on the Gaza aid flotilla have been high. The White House has been encouraging the two nations to mend fences, but now Congress is getting involved. Anthony Weiner, a congressman from New York, recently organized a special order in support of Israel. Here he is talking about the Gaza aid flotilla and who organized it.
It had enormous amount of support by some of the worst enemies of peace in that region, and some of the worst enemies, quite literally, not only of Israel, but of the United States as well. And I mean Turkey, Iran, Hamas, Israel does not any longer occupy the West Bank or Gaza. They left. They left it to the people, to the Palestinian people.
We're looking at the current tensions in the region with Stephen Kinzer, a veteran journalist and author of Reset, Iran, Turkey and America's Future, and MJ Rosenberg, a senior foreign policy fellow at Media Matters Action Network, along with Nuh Yilmaz, the director of the Washington office of the Turkish think tank CETA. Now, as we return to our discussion, let's examine what Congressman Weiner said. Nuh Yilmaz, I want to put it to you. He called Turkey one of the worst enemies of not only peace, but of the U.S. itself. How is that going to go down? I mean, when I last looked, I think Turkey was a NATO ally of the U.S.
Certainly. I think that view, I hear that view at the Congress here in Washington, but I don't think that really represents the U.S. position right now, not even position of Congress. So some congressmen who really care only about the right-wing Israeli government's policies really point out those ideas. But if you look at the details of the issue, Turkish-American relations completely are on track. Turkey is part of NATO. Turkey is part of UN. Turkey is part of NPT. Turkey is part of almost any regional organization. And also, Turkey really abides by the rules of these organizations in the region. But now I think we really, there's a risk that some people in Washington really turn Turkish-Israeli tension, which really arises from certain policies of Israeli current government, turn into a Turkish-American problem. But I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to really produce some kind of constructive results in terms of Turkish-American relations.
Stephen Kinzer, this leads me back to what George, our caller from Washington, D.C., was asking just before the break. And he was saying, well, we know what Israel gets out of the relationship with America, but what does the U.S. get out of it? And I know you've written about this specifically.
Well, first of all, our relations with Israel, like our relations with all the countries in the Middle East, are way outdated. We haven't changed our policy from the Cold War. The Cold War has been over 20 years. The strategic environment in the Middle East has changed completely. There are terrifying new threats emerging from there, but also very interesting strategic opportunities. But we're not able to take advantage of those because our policy is still stuck back in a past era. We need a reset, a reconception of how we should approach that region of the world. And big reconceptions like that are something that the U.S. government and our foreign policy process is not good at. Now, what did the U.S. get from the Israel relationship over the past years, the Cold War, before the world changed? Well, I think there were three things. First of all, we felt a connection of history and values. It made us feel good to be supporting Israel. Second, Israel provided a lot of covert help for the United States during the Cold War. Whenever the U.S. needed help, for example, to arm the government of Guatemala during the 1980s, but we couldn't do it because Congress forbade U.S. aid to Guatemala, we got Israel to do it. And then we would pay back Israel some other way. So we used Israel for many things during the Cold War that many people didn't know about at the time. Some of these operations are only becoming clear now. And then third, I think, to be very frank, what the U.S. got out of it is that many American politicians were able to build up their campaign war chests and rely on donations from Americans who are sympathetic to Israel.
Do you think, Stephen, that now the U.S. has an interest in using Israel to effectively launch aggression against Iran?
I hope it won't come to that. I really think that there's a difference of opinion between Israel and the United States on the the wisdom of attacking Iran. I've just come back from Iran, and I have sensed again the tremendously pro-American sentiment of ordinary people there. It's the only Muslim country in the world where most people are pro-American. That pro-American sentiment in Iran is a huge strategic asset for the United States. We shouldn't do anything to jeopardize that. So over the long run, political change is going to happen in Iran. We need to maintain that public support for the U.S. and not do things that might make us feel good in the short run, maybe satisfy our emotions, but actually, in the long run, undermine our own national security. This is what the U.S. has done too often in the past. We act out of emotion for short-term gain, and then years later we look back and say, what a mess we created, why did we do that?
MJ Rosenberg, I followed your articles, are fascinating stuff, and one that you wrote recently, and I just want to touch on this briefly, is the power of AIPAC and the pro-Israel lobby in America, and the way it can really scare politicians and key players here. And you read about David Petraeus, a key general in America, when he actually had commented that the Israeli-Palestinian situation and the lack of peace process undermines America's credibility and threatens America in the region. suddenly, when you quoted that, there was backlash. Tell me briefly about that.
Well, what happened is I praised General Petraeus for telling Congress that continuation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the perception that the United States is always on Israel's side harms United States interests. That's what he said. I praised him for saying it, and we now have access to emails that he sent out right after he received my column, in which he went into a panic because he was being praised for telling the truth about the Middle East. And he got in contact immediately with a neoconservative writer at the Wall Street Journal named Max Boot, and basically said, what should I do? I'm being praised for suggesting that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict should be resolved. And Boot said, well, maybe you should do this or that. And Petraeus said, well, maybe I should go to a Holocaust meeting and show how I'm on the side of the pro-Israel community. The whole point was I praised him for saying what was right from the point of view of the United States. It was his words. And he was afraid to be praised on those grounds. Why? Because of the power of AIPAC. Because AIPAC is not only the most powerful foreign policy lobby in Washington, it has no competition.
No, let me give an email to you that we got in from a viewer in the US. Vincent M. La Barbera wrote in saying, in comparison, the stance of an illegal blockade and murdering peace activists, I have a hard time calling Turkey's stance tough. More nations should join Turkey in opposing actions that threaten world peace. I wanted to just leave. I've actually got to end the show there, but I just want to wonder if, in a sentence, is Turkey going to get tougher on Israel?
I think so, because Turkey created a road plan to deal with Israel. Turkey is a friend of Israel, but wants Israel to do certain things that would help the regional stability.
So
that's why it's going to be
gentlemen.
tough.
I'm sorry we're out of time. An interesting conversation. Thanks very much for your contribution. And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can follow our program on Twitter. We'll keep you notified of upcoming shows. Be sure to tweet us your questions and comments to pose to our guests. On the next show, Mexican democracy under siege. How much have the drug lords benefited from the loss of faith in political institutions? And is a parallel order being established? Be sure to tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.